Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time today to connect with us about the continuous improvement plans for the 21-22 school year. I know that the past 18 months have been particularly challenging in education, and I really appreciate all the hard work that all of you have done during that time and the fact that you're already thinking ahead to the next school year. So as many of you know, there were quite a few changes made to the sections of statute that apply to continuous improvement plans, literacy intervention program plans, and college and career advising and mentoring plans during this past legislative session. So today's webinar is going to be very focused on updating you and making sure that you're fully aware of those changes and how the requirements have shifted, what you need to do and what you don't need to do, what you need to turn in and what you don't need to turn in, and then really walking you through the new continuous improvement plan templates that are designed to meet the new statutory requirements. We will also just give you the disclaimer now that based on the way that the legislation was written, the new section of statute does involve a commission coming together around continuous improvement planning. That group has not yet met, and it is possible that once they start meeting that the templates could change for future years, but we do not anticipate that having any impact on what we are releasing for the 21-22 school year. And we really did make an effort to align the templates to the requirements while also trying to keep them as similar to past templates as possible, since we know so many of you have been using those templates in the past few years. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. So changes effective July 1st, 2021. The biggest thing to know is that the continuous improvement plans have really been expanded and taken on some of the pieces of the advising and literacy plans. This is particularly true in terms of metrics. So those of you that used the combined district plan metrics in the past will see that the new CIP metrics is most similar to that. It will feel quite familiar. But there are also some additions to that metrics template based on some of the language that was added to the section of statute around what is required to be included in the continuous improvement plans. Amongst those, and probably the biggest change, is that the CIP metrics template now includes a section for providing staff performance data, and I will walk you through that today. The literacy intervention program plan, per law, all districts and charters are still required to maintain a literacy intervention program plan and to update it when appropriate, when you feel that's necessary. However, you are no longer required to submit your literacy plan to the state, to our office for review. One thing to note in terms of determining if you think that you need to update your plan is that the State Board of Education did approve a new Idaho Comprehensive Literacy Plan in December 2020, in the middle of last school year. And your literacy plan is required to be aligned to that Idaho Comprehensive Literacy Plan. So we strongly recommend that you take a look at that plan and make sure that your literacy plan is aligned to that. I do see a question in the chat, which is a good one, which was that the literacy plan was previously not required for districts that serve above grade, don't have grades K through 3. That's still true. So when we're talking about the literacy intervention program plan, it's really districts that or charter schools that have students in grades kindergarten through 3rd grade that need to make sure to maintain that plan. The comprehensive literacy plan does go beyond that though. So we encourage all of you to review that even if you don't have a literacy plan in place so that you know what's in there. Finally, the college and career advising and mentoring plan is no longer required to be updated or submitted. We do encourage you to continue to maintain a plan so that you can provide guidance within your districts and schools around how to spend your advising funds, but you are not required to have one. We will continue to provide templates both for the literacy intervention plan and the advising plan for districts and charters that want to use those. Questions about the changes before I move on and get into further details? Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, so I'm going to keep going. So in terms of the continuous improvement plan, first of all, the basics, the continuous improvement plan is due October 1st, 2021. And the way the statute is written has changed. It used to say you have to post it by October 1st onto your website. It now says you have to post it by October 1st onto your website, and then in a separate section of that same area of statute, it also says you have to submit it. So please make sure that you're not just posting it up on your website and assuming we will go look for it. You do also need to submit it to our office. And when you do, we do appreciate it if you provide us with a link to where you have it on your district's website, because we do actually go and check to make sure you have it posted and bug you if you don't. And it's very helpful to us if you have it up there. One thing to note, probably the most common question that I've gotten in the past regarding posting it is, when you submit it to us on October 1st, you may not feel like that's the final version. You should still post that up onto your website. You can always mark it with draft if you want to, but it does need to still be posted by October 1st. Other things, we do have new templates as we're going to walk through today, and those are all up on our website. There's a link here. There's a link in the emails that I sent out this past week. So that's a good place for resources. And in a little bit, I'll actually show you that section of the website and what's changed there so that you know where to find what you need. Another important note about the CIPs is that we are still going to allow districts and charter schools to maintain narrative exemptions that you had in the past, or to request a narrative exemption for this year. And how that would happen is if your mission, vision, and community involvement for the continuous improvement plan have not changed, and you had a compliant narrative that was either a continuous improvement plan narrative or a combined plan narrative last year, then you can notify us that you haven't changed anything and ask to not submit a new narrative. So that is still allowed. And if you have questions about that, you can certainly reach out to me and I'll help you figure out if you qualify for a narrative exemption. The CIP metrics do have to be revised and submitted annually. Any questions before I move on? So there was a question about, will the templates that are new be aligned to the state comprehensive literacy plan? So the template has always had, the literacy plan template has always had a section where we ask you to reflect on your literacy plan's alignment to the comprehensive literacy plan that the state releases. What you need to do is check and see if your narrative is still accurate. Take a look at your narrative, take a look at the new plan and make sure that it matches up. Otherwise, you probably want to update your narrative. But again, those literacy plans do not need to be submitted to the state. We're just suggesting to folks that you probably ought to take a look at that, both because the new literacy plan, I think, is a big improvement on the previous one, and I think is much more valuable to districts and schools, and we want to make sure all of you are looking at it. And also because statute does require you to have your literacy plans aligned to that. That's the only question I see for now, but I want to pause and give you all the chance to type if you have any questions about submitting your plans. Okay, I'm going to jump over to the State Board of Education's website to show you where you should be going to get templates and resources. We email these out as well, but we want to make sure that you know where to get them and you know where you can find what you need. So if you go to the State Board of Education's website, which is boardofed.idaho.gov, you'll land on this homepage. If you go to the State Department of Education's website, you're not in the right place. So make sure you're on the board's website. From there, if you put your cursor over K-12 education, you'll have another toolbar drop down. And then if you go to district/charter school planning, that's really the page that's been designed for this plans process. And you'll see that it's been substantially updated this year to try to make it clear what you need to do and what you need to turn in, including an overview of some of the pieces that I've already clarified around things that have changed. And then we really separated the templates into two separate sections this year. The first section is templates for the required continuous improvement plan. That includes the templates. When you click right here, they drop down, and other resources, which is the review checklist, and then the go-on rates, which will be posted soon. The templates for other plans are the templates for the Literacy Intervention Program Plan and the College and Career Advising and Mentoring Plan. Those are both just there for your use if you would like to use them. So that's the website. Any questions? Great. All right, jumping into the Continuous Improvement Plan template. The narrative template will look very familiar, especially if you previously had a standalone continuous improvement plan, because the narrative is identical. There were no changes in terms of what needed to be in this narrative. So we tried to keep it as simple as possible so that narrative exemptions could continue, and other sort of reflective sections were put into the metrics that need to be updated annually. So here, there's really two sections in the narrative: mission and vision, and community involvement in plan development. Some notes about these: the mission and vision statement ideally should be two distinct and easily identifiable statements. Subheaders is really great in terms of helping with that. You can include other statements if you want to, but you don't have to. The community involvement in plan development, probably the most common question I get about this is, what's an appropriate level of community involvement? The statute doesn't actually clarify that. So what I always tell people is, you need to have a way that the public was able to provide feedback into your plan. So that for some people could look like it went to an open board meeting and you notified the public ahead of time that it was going to be going to the board meeting and you gave opportunity for feedback. For others that go further, sometimes it involves a survey and the results of the survey being taken into consideration when the continuous improvement plan is being developed or the metrics targets are being set. For others, it's a committee that involves both educators from the school district and people from the community. There isn't really any one specific way that we say you have to do this, just that you have to, and that we ask you to describe that process in your narrative. And like I said before, if you are using the same process as the past and your mission and vision haven't changed, you're probably going to qualify for a narrative exemption if you want one. Okay, moving along. In terms of the metrics, we are going to walk through the metrics live. I'm going to pull up the metrics template and show you some things and actually type some things in so that you can see where things go. But I want to point out just some very important sort of big level things first. The CIP metrics template has 3 tabs. That's a really important thing to know from the very beginning, is that if you want to get all your data into it correctly, you need to know it has 3 tabs and that you are going to be working on 2 of those 3 tabs. So if you only go in and enter data into 1 tab, you have not finished the work. And if you send it in, we're going to say, hey, you've totally left off everything on staff performance because you never clicked on that tab. So just make sure you know 3 tabs. The first of the 3 tabs is instructions and examples. Please, please, please do not enter your data in over top of our instructions and examples and then leave the other tabs blank, because when it comes to us, it's really hard for us to tell that that's what you've done. So we have in the past made the mistake of reaching out to districts and charters and suggesting that they haven't done the work because the other tabs are blank. So leave the instructions and examples tab the way it is, and then use the other 2 tabs to enter your data. Another important thing, another one of those sort of common oversights that we see from folks, that we have seen for the last few years, is in your metrics tab, there is a place for you to put a link to your district level report card as released by the State Department of Education. That report card is required because it addresses some of the requirements are in the law for demographics and previous data that we don't have to make you put into your CIP as long as you put a link to your report card. It needs to be a direct link to idahoschools.org, not a link to your district website. That's the most common mistake we see, is folks either leaving it blank or putting a link to your district website. On your CIP, it needs to be a straight link to your district level report card on idahoschools.org. And in the instructions and examples, we give an example of what that looks like exactly. And you literally could change that out with your district number and get the right address. So I'll point that out when we get there. Another important thing for this year, if your district or charter school has previously used a locally created format for your continuous improvement plan, you may still do so. However, we strongly, strongly encourage that this year you take a close look at the template if you're using your locally designed, because so many of the requirements have changed that if you were using a locally designed format in the past and you were able to get it to a place of compliance, if you don't look at the new one, you'll miss quite a few things. So make sure that if you want to have it look different, you want to have it include more pieces of a larger strategic plan for your district, that's fine. Just make sure you understand what the requirements are by using our template and our checklist to make sure that you include everything that's necessary. So any questions before I move on to actually showing you the CIP metrics template, which is the biggest piece of the continuous improvement plan? So there's a question already about teacher performance data, staff performance data regarding the end size, and we will get there. So Jill, I'm just gonna put a little tab on that one and say that I knew that question was gonna come up. And when we get to the staff performance data, we'll talk about aggregating data or not including it. All right, any other questions?
Allison, real quick.
Yes.
We have a question about where to get, is there a template for a narrative exemption, or do they just email you or myself?
Such a great question. So the way the narrative exemption process goes is if you're confident that you qualify for a narrative exemption, then when you send your new plan in, you would just tell us in the email that you're requesting a narrative exemption. If you're unsure if you qualify for a narrative exemption, just email me ahead of time and ask, and then I will email you back and you'll have that confirmation, and I will save that as well so that I have it on file. Yeah, great question. All right, moving over to the actual continuous improvement plan template. Can everybody see it okay? Somebody give me a thumbs up. I see Mike Nelson, so thumbs up, Mike. Awesome. Okay, so this is the instructions and examples tab. This is not where you type. This is where you just look and see how you're supposed to do it and what the examples are. The instructions really do walk you through it, and there are 2 full pages of instructions this year. So when you're doing it, one of the things I recommend doing is just printing out these 2 pages, having them off to the side, then looking through the examples so that you can understand what it's all supposed to look like. And then as you're doing your own work, you also then will have these instructions there to help guide you if you run into questions. And of course, if you read through the instructions and you're working on it and you're still confused, you are welcome to reach out to me. You can send me an email or give me a call, and I really do try to be as responsive as possible around CIPs. I do get busy, especially right before they are due, because that tends to be when most of the questions come in, but I will do my best to get back to people quickly. So I'm not going to walk you through all the instructions because I wrote them and I think that you can all read them, but I'm just going to point out that they're here, and that also there's this big, bold yellow place that again reminds you to not type your data in here. You might get the sense from me that this has happened a few times. It's happened more than a few times. It's happened a lot. So it's just something we really like to remind you of. So then example metrics. One of the things to note here is there's that idahoschools.org format. This is using Weiser as an example, their District 431. But for any of your districts, including any charter schools that are an independent LEA, all you have to do to know your Idaho schools link is to change those last 3 digits. And then you will have your link. Section 1, there's some renaming that happened this year, both for clarity and to align with the new statute. So Section 1 is now called Student Achievement and Growth Metrics because that's language that's now used in the statute. We also changed the word benchmarks to performance targets, because there's been a lot of confusion over the years about benchmarks being past data versus performance targets being goals you are setting. Similar to last year, there are two columns here for performance targets, 2021 and 21-22. The reason we have the 2021 column there is you should pull up your last year's plan and fill in any goals that you set last year for 2021, because there's a section in the metrics later on where you reflect on those goals and how you did. So you need to provide last year's goals in the 2021 column, and in the 21-22 column, you're providing goals for this year. So in section 1, you're providing no historical data, no performance data, just performance targets, goals from last year, and then what you're setting for 2021-22. If there's an item here in section 1 that you did not set a goal for last year, and I'll point some out to you, then you can just enter NA. So here's an example. And a new metric that got added this year based on statutory language around including growth metrics is the percent of students who make adequate growth on the grade 8 math ISAT. That was not a part of the metrics for either the CIP or combined plan last year. So you would not have a goal that you set in your last year's plan for that metric. So you just put NA and keep going. But for this year, you need to set a goal for the percent who will make adequate growth. Another thing that we did is section 1, anything that is blue, shaded blue is required, but we have a couple of non-shaded metrics that we've listed as optional that often come up, and so we wanted to include them. And because they are also related to data on the report card. And some districts prefer to look at their 5-year cohort graduation rate either equal to or as more important than their 4-year graduation rate. So we wanted to make sure to give you the option to include that and set goals for it if you choose, but you are not required to. Moving along, so this first section of student achievement and growth metrics should all look pretty familiar. It's graduation rate, ISAT. Like I said, the change here is the addition of those growth metrics for ISAT. Other than that, it should look very, very familiar. Section 2 is the literacy, proficiency, and growth metrics. And again, you should be giving us both last year's performance targets that you set and this year's performance targets that you are setting. And these also should look very, very similar to the past in that they include the IRI for kindergarten through 3rd grade. The addition here is 4th grade ISAT and adequate growth on the 4th grade ISAT. And the reason for that has to do with language around growth for students and looking at the ISAT as a part of literacy. So that's the reason for that addition. Are there questions on what I've gone through so far? Those first 2 sections? They should look really, really similar, especially for those that have used the combined plan in the past, which was most of you last year.
Allison, there's one that's been sent to me privately, so you won't be able to see it. It says, how is adequate growth determined? Is there a state metric or report for that, or is it locally determined?
Great question. So adequate growth is state determined, and it's on your report card. So adequate growth is based on a trajectory growth model that we use at the state level. And we do report out on your report card the percent of your students who met that adequate growth target that was set for them mathematically through our trajectory growth model. So you should be able to look at past data related to that and then be able to set your goals for the future. Yeah.
There's one more in the chat,
okay.
Or 2 more now. When will report cards be released?
That's a great question that I don't have an answer to, but I can certainly find out. And when I send out the email with the With the recording, I'll try to include it in that email because that is a great question. I have not communicated with Kevin Whitman recently about when the new report cards are going to be released. The ISAT data for 2021 has not yet been released, and we don't release report cards until after that. So I know that we are quite close on the ISAT data being released, so I would think that we're probably pretty close on report cards as well.
Will the ISAT growth numbers be sent to each district, and will that include subgroup growth and proficiency?
So the ISAT growth data, again, is up on your report card, and you should also be able to access it through the portal where you're able to get your district data as soon as it's available. And if you don't have the data or you want more than what's made available to you, you can certainly reach out to Kevin Whitman and the State Department's accountability team, and they can help you to access additional data. But for the CIP for this, it's really just that overall 8th grade, overall 6th grade number that you need to think about. That doesn't mean you can't look at things like subgroup data, but you don't have to set goals for subgroups in the continuous improvement plan.
Okay, just 2 more as of now. Let me see. Are we only listing the target and not the performance for the 2021 year?
Yes. So the reason we don't have you list the performance for 2021 is that's through your report card. So once you've put that report card link up, we know that your 2021 performance on these metrics is going to be up on that report card. So we don't make you enter it in because anybody can go look at it on your report card. So it is just performance targets for this section. For sections 1 and 2, it's only what performance targets did you set last year and what are your goals for this year?
Okay, and then just one more. Again, on adequate growth, how is that figured and how is that determined?
So for adequate growth, I can provide those of you that are interested with a much more detailed breakdown of how that trajectory growth model works and how that adequate growth is determined. But it is, to sort of put it in the simplest terms, it looks at a student's score from year to year. So 4th grade is the first time that a student can have an adequate growth target because it looks at their 3rd grade ISAT and then their 4th grade ISAT, and it looks at the amount of growth they had. And then it essentially builds a trajectory. If a student is below proficient, it says, what will it take for that student to become proficient within X number of years, right? And it then divides that down and sets a target for them that's an annual target for them to meet to grow towards proficiency. If a student is already proficient or advanced, then their growth target is 0 or even negative. It really can't ever go negative, but basically, as long as they maintain proficient or advanced status, they don't have to demonstrate additional growth. There's been some discussion about possibly changing that in the future, but for now, that is still the way that the trajectory growth model looks at growth targets. So I can certainly provide, there's a whole write-up on there's a 1-pager on how adequate growth is calculated that was put together a couple years ago when we started that model that I can send out to folks to help give more details. So I'll provide a link or attach it to the email when the webinar recording goes live next week.
2 more questions that came in while we were answering the last one. Is that adequate growth based on the spreadsheet that Kevin Whitman built a couple of years ago?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. And then what would you like to see on staff performance data?
We'll get there. We're not to staff performance yet. We're working our way there. So next up, after section 1 and section 2, which, like I said, should look super familiar, then we get to section 3. And I'm actually going to take the zoom out a little bit, even though it will make it a little harder to see because I want you to see both options at once. So there's a new section in the statute that says that you have to provide how you are going to measure progress towards literacy goals and targets. One of the ways that you could do this is using an LEA chosen performance metric, which used to be required for the literacy plan. So you should already have one that you created for your literacy plan in the past. If you have grades K through 3, you would need to provide it here. If you don't have students in grades K through 3, you can skip past section 3, the yellow metrics. But for most of you that need to fill this out, you have 2 options to fill it out. Section 3A allows you to use an LEA chosen metric to demonstrate how you are going to measure progress towards literacy goals and targets. Your other option, if you don't like that one, is to do it in a sort of narrative format, which section 3B, you would then sort of say, here's how we want to do this. Here's how we want to measure progress towards literacy goals and targets. So you do not have to fill out both section 3A and section 3B. You're picking one. Whichever one you like better is what you are welcome to do. And with section 3B, we gave a couple of examples. We said example 1 is if 3A is complete, you might just put here, our district is measuring progress towards our literacy targets using the LEA chosen metrics in section 3A. If you left 3A blank, you would need to write a longer narrative demonstrating how you're measuring progress. So that is a sort of new section and also sort of not, because it's very similar to the LEA chosen metrics of the past. Questions about that? Okay, the next section is college and career advising and mentoring performance metrics. This section is almost identical to what was included in the combined plan or the advising plans of the past. For districts and schools that do not have any high school grades, if you don't have 8th grade through 12th grade, you do not have to complete this. If you have any of those grades, even if you only have 8th grade, because you have a middle school and you have 8th graders, then you do need to complete the applicable metrics. So you might only fill in the 8th grade plans and then move on. So this would depend on the grades you have. The data is almost exactly the same. The only difference here is that we ask you to list the 2021 performance targets. Again, what were your goals for this last year? Which if you had an advising plan or a combined plan, you would have created these goals. And then this is the only place where you do have to provide some results. And the reason is these things are not on the report card. So none of these metrics are included on your idahoschools.org report card. So we do have to have you provide 1 year of prior results here. Questions about that? Again, it should look really, really familiar. No questions? All right.
We had one just pop up.
Oh, did you have one?
Yes. Has OSB created a list of the CTE certificates that are acceptable?
That's such a great question. I like that one a lot. And the simple answer is no. We're very flexible on this. The way that the statute and rule were previously written related to the college and career advising was broad. And so we essentially left it to districts and schools to determine how you want to interpret that and to enter the data in as you feel appropriate. And then if you want to give more details about how you interpreted that, you can include that in the notes section that's at the bottom of the metrics template. I'll also say that the new statute has just a very broad statement about college and career advising metrics. So for now, we are following the previous rule that was established until we know whether or not the commission that's going to be working on the CIPs wishes to change this section in some way. All right. Section 5 is the advising version of the literacy one we went over a few minutes ago, where the language changed and says you need to demonstrate how you're going to measure progress towards college and career advising and mentoring goals. So we again gave you the same 2 options. Use either in section 5A one or more LEA chosen performance metrics, which was required previously for the advising plan. So you should have one from prior year combined plan or advising plan, or do it in a narrative format in section 5B. Questions about that? Hopefully not too scary. All right. The next section is, sorry, it just bounced on me. Section 6, the report of progress narrative. So I gave a much longer example this year on the report of progress narrative. Last year was the first year where the report of progress narrative became a much more substantial part of the metrics template. And it is remaining the same because of the language and statute. Last year, we let you all, we gave you a lot of flexibility on this report of progress narrative because we recognized that when you were developing your 2021 plans, you did not have very much data to work with from the prior year, from 2019-20. So we had districts who literally had like one or two sentences that said something like, we don't have much data. And we let that pass by because, okay, fair. I'm warning you now that this year that would not be an adequate response. So please make sure to really think through what you put in this section. This section is really supposed to be that you should reflect back on the sections above it and on your previous goals that you've included in the sections above it, on those metrics, the performance targets that you set last year, and how you did in comparison to those. There is no requirement here that we expect that you met all of those goals. And no one's going to come take away your money if you didn't meet all of the goals that you set in last year's plan, particularly given the situation that all of you were dealing with at the beginning of last year, trying to set goals. But you do need to sort of say, here's where we were successful. Here's what seemed to go okay. And here's what didn't. Right? Here were some challenges. Here's places where it appears the pandemic may have had a real impact on us. And then it's helpful to potentially sort of say how you might want to address those areas of challenge. That's not required as the report of progress. The report of progress really is, how did you do in comparison to those goals? But I would include it in my response if it were me, because I would want the public to see that I'm already thinking about how we're going to address the areas that didn't go as well. So the question that Janet has is, this is for all the performance targets, not just literacy, correct? Yes, Janet, correct. So we put it here because it should address all of the performance targets that you set for 2021 for all the sections that are prior to this. So the general CIP ones for ISAT, graduation rate, the literacy, the college and career advising, all of it. And the way the new statute language is written, it really does include all of it. In the past, there was a report of progress specifically attached to CIP goals and one specifically attached to literacy. Now it's connected to all of the CIP. And now the CIP metrics officially includes literacy and advising and the old CIP targets. So all of it. Yeah. Any other questions related to that report of progress and what you should be putting in here? It does not need to be a whole page long, and you don't have to address every single performance target, every goal you set. Highlights, right? Highlight the things that seem to go really well and the things that seem to be the biggest challenge, and then address those.
One more question from someone who's new to the state. Where should they look for the district CIP from last year?
If you can't find it, you can contact me because I do. So if you go looking and you don't easily find it, just send me an email and I'll get it for you. I have every single one of them on file. All right. Section 7 below that is notes, and that's really just an optional space where if there's something that you did up above that you want to explain or add any additional context to, you are welcome to do it, but you're not required to. Section 8 is staff performance. Now, I'm going to show you the example version, and then we'll jump over to the blank staff performance in a minute and talk through that, because you'll see that it's very blank. What I tried to do in the examples is show you that you can aggregate your staff in a number of ways. You don't need to just aggregate, you don't need to just think 6th grade science. That might be the right group, or it might not be the right group. So what I encourage you to think of in terms of aggregating your staff together is the assessment tool that's used. Because the goal is the percent of students taught by staff in that grade or grade band or subject band that meet measurable student achievement targets or success indicators on the assessment tool. So the assessment tool for that group. So you'll see that I gave an example here that you might use for K through 5 physical education, the Presidential Youth Fitness Club Award for those grades, and then you might have results and a target for that. And that would allow you to group all of your K through 5 PE teachers together into one group, which would then result in an N size of 5 or more. If your N size for the group of staff that are connected with a given assessment tool is smaller than 5, you should not provide it because of redaction rules and making sure that you're not including PII in the report, because the report, your continuous improvement plan, goes up on your website. So you don't want to be including something in your continuous improvement plan that is going to result in an N size being too small and someone being able to identify student performance or staff performance for evaluation purposes of an individual staff member or individual student. So make sure you're really thoughtful about the aggregation and redaction rules that would apply here. So what I say is, think about how you can aggregate in a way to anybody using the same assessment tool to protect people. And if you can't, because your goals that you're using already for staff performance for your teacher and staff evaluations have already been established, and if you really can't create groups that are 5 or more, then you don't include it. And you tell us here or in the notes section that's on the other tab that that's what happened, right? There are going to be small, especially small rural districts who are absolutely positively not going to be able to provide data for this section, potentially at all. Same with some charter schools. There may be some that just are not going to have an N that is 5 or more. Now note that it's 5 or more, not greater than 5, right? So not 6, 5 or more. 0 to 4, not allowed. 5 or more is. So that's a really important thing here. That's been the number one question I've gotten so far, is how to deal with small N sizes. And the answer is by separate data privacy rules, you do not submit that data. And then you just need to provide that somewhere. If you submit your plan and your staff performance data is blank, and you have not either on that tab or in the notes indicated that's because you didn't meet the N size for any staff, then we're going to just contact you and say, hey, your staff performance data is blank. So please make sure that if you are one of the districts or charters that cannot fill it out, that you make it clear that you can't fill it out. So I see a couple questions about whether or not, about how to report. Are there any scenarios where you wouldn't report? N size is really the main thing. If you can't combine the groups together based on assessment tool, because you can go across grades. You can go K through 5, you could go K through 3, you could go 4 through 6. You could go by all subjects. You could go specific subjects, right? I have an example here of grades 6 through 8 music being all grouped together. So you can think of creative ways to group as long as the assessment tool is the same. And if it's not, it's not. Doing it by department would absolutely be allowed. So, right? So music, Spanish, science, math, English, absolutely. As long as you have a similar assessment tool or one single assessment tool that you can reference, then you definitely can group them together. Let me see if I missed any. How many staff performance measures are required? All of your staff. So you have to think about all of your staff and how to group all of your staff. There's no minimum number. There's no maximum number. It just says that you have to report your staff performance. That's what the new section of statute says. So looking at the blank version of this, it's just really wide open for you. All we put in was that performance metric, and then everything else is open because you have to figure out how you're going to group. And you may need to add lines. I feel like I gave a lot of available rows, but I'm realistic that for some of you, especially those that are in mid to large districts, that might not be enough rows, and then you just need to add in as needed. How about an all staff assessment tool, staff choice, then the average of all staff? Mary, I suppose that if that was the only way you could provide the data, if you weren't going to meet the N size by using any other common assessment tool, that at least that way you would be including something to report. I don't think that's quite the intention, right? They want to see what you're using to assess in addition to how people are performing. But if that's the only way to meet an N of 5, it certainly wouldn't hurt to do that so that you're including something. And then another question I see is, can your grade band involve more than one school, such as ISAT 3 through 10, but involves 2 schools? Absolutely. So the continuous improvement plan is a district-wide plan. So if you're a charter and you have more than one charter, but they're under the same LEA number, as long as they've got the same LEA number, they're one district. In the case of a sort of traditional district, then in a traditional district, absolutely, many of you will have more than one school, and you can aggregate your groups across schools. Other questions about this? I know this is the most unfamiliar, newest of the sections of the continuous improvement plan. So I want to make sure that if you have questions that I address them.
One more, Allison, that was sent to me privately. For schools without lower grades, should they delete the rows that don't pertain to the school, or just write not applicable in the cells?
So that's the difference between the instructions and examples and the actual place where you're going to enter data. So the instructions and examples has examples that are for lower grades, but the actual staff performance report where you're going to enter your data is the staff performance report tab, and then you will see it's all blank. So that's where you're going to enter in the appropriate grades and or subjects that this applies to. So you won't need to delete anything because you're really building it from scratch, and then hopefully in future years you'll just be able to reuse it. Other questions? I'm definitely giving that a pause because I know this is the section where I've already gotten the most questions by email and phone, and so I just want to make sure there isn't any other confusion. This should be something where you already have assessment tools identified, because you already should be doing this for your performance evaluations per law. So these should already be identified. You shouldn't be picking them out for this process. Rather, you should be looking through what you're already using for staff evaluations and grouping appropriately. So this says the examples seem to mostly be a rehash of IRI of ISAT. That was just an example, Mark. We know that folks are using all sorts of things, and I didn't want to try and keep up with all of y'all in terms of different types of assessments that you might be using for your teachers. So whatever you're using is what you should reflect on here. Does that make sense? Thanks for the thumbs up. This may have been covered. Yes, so great question. So this seems to be a new requirement. Well, it's a new requirement to report it this way, but you should already have the data because the process of using the measurable student achievement targets or success indicators is already been required for staff evaluations. So you should already be able to go back and pull the data for 2021 based on those staff evaluations. That's the reason that the 2021 results is there. And the statute says that you have to provide your results and a goal for the upcoming year. So you should be able to gather that data. I see from someone that for small rural charters, et cetera, it might feel strange for this to be blank. So that's where it's going to be important for you to either on this page or, like I said, in the metrics down here in section 7, I think it is, in the notes, explain, right? We're not able to provide any staff performance data because none of our aggregated groups are 5 or more. And then we can't get on you about it and nobody else can either. And yes, if you do pre-post, you absolutely could use that as well. And if you need to slightly change or tweak the language in that performance metric, you can. We tried to keep it as straightforward and aligned to what's required by law as we could, but we also recognize that as you're grouping and figuring that out, you might need to adjust it a little bit, and that would be okay. Okay, Josh. So Josh's question is, should you make sure that the same information that you entered into the CLDS for performance targets matches here? It wouldn't hurt for it to match, but you may be grouping people differently here than you did there in order to aggregate to groups of 5 or more. So it doesn't necessarily have to match, and nobody is going to be checking. So I'm not, I'll say that. I'm maybe not nobody. I'm not going to go check to see if they match. So no promises if there's somebody else crazy enough to do that, but I'm not going to be checking. Sid Crew, you have an except for science question, and I'm not entirely clear on what the question is. So maybe you could add more, or maybe you already did and I just haven't seen it yet. Nope, I haven't seen it yet. So Sid, if you could clarify your question in the chat, either to everyone or to Morgan, that would be helpful. Lisa Sexton, according to statute, each teacher can choose an assessment, right? Yes. So absolutely what you just said is totally true, Lisa, that as you noted in the chat, that statute allows teachers to choose their assessment, and that there may be teachers within the same department that are using different assessments and those that are using the same assessments. It would be you can group however makes sense to you, right? So that's why I was saying it's important to, from my perspective, to group by assessment. So maybe you're going to have high school English group A and high school English group B who are using 2 different assessments. And that would be fine. And if a group then results in, because of the way that they've chosen individual assessments and they're not meeting the N of 5, they don't get included. When this was being written, we pushed back a little bit and kind of pointed out that the statute says that individual assessments can be chosen and that aggregation was going to potentially be difficult, but it is a requirement per statute. So all that we can ask you to do is to try your best to provide the data while recognizing the data privacy laws that are in place. So Angie, that's a great question. The N for staff performance is the number of staff members, not students. So remember that by data privacy, we would not want either to be able to identify a teacher's individual level of performance or any of their students' performance. So you're really looking to protect both. So N of 5 should be staff, 5 staff. Oh, so the piece was around science teachers not getting science scores for the year. So yes, if you have a goal that you're setting for certain teachers and there isn't past results for a really good reason, then you would put NA or make a note in there about why it wasn't applicable, right? There were no 2021 science results available. Okay, so Greg's clarification is, if I have 50 ELA teachers in high school, use 20 different assessments, 20 use ISAT and 10 use MAP, then we need to track these all down and report on them. Is this accurate? So I would say do the very best you can. The way that it's currently written, I think so. We are trying our best to make this as simple as possible and as manageable as possible. And we are planning to speak with the commission once they are all together about whether or not we could make some adjustments to this by making additional clarifications in administrative rule. But because we have not done that yet, for now, all we have is the statutory language to go on, which does say that you will report out all the staff performance. And like I said, we're recommending aggregating by assessment tool because that seems to be the best way to approach it. So staff, so again, the N we're looking for is 5 or more. 0 to 4 is not reportable, 5 or more is. And yes, Greg, I agree. Large districts are going to have a real challenge filling this out this year. And I apologize for that. I wish I could make it easier and have it not be feeling like it's a heavy lift. I know it. I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge. And we will do our best to try and simplify the process going forward. And we will communicate with all of you about feedback, ideas that you have to make it easier that we can take to that commission to try and have this not feel stressful. So the way that we have this worded, there was a question about the percentage of students who meet the target or the percentage of staff whose students meet the target. The way we have it worded is percentage of students taught by staff in that group. So that you're essentially saying for this group, the target would be that for this aggregated group of, say, high school English teachers, we hope that 75% of the students taught by that group of teachers will meet their targets. If you wanted to, you could slightly shift the language towards staff, and I would think that that would still meet the language in statute. And I could certainly double check if somebody is interested in doing it that way. So the question about having 3 teachers that give the IRI wouldn't be able to use that assessment is the 3 teachers is less than 5. So you wouldn't be able to report on the performance of those 3 teachers. You wouldn't be able to average the performance of their students into a group. And again, you should have already identified the assessment tool that you're using for staff evaluations. So hopefully this isn't, that part of it isn't necessarily new. Morgan, are there any questions that went your direction that I haven't seen?
Nope, you've gotten to all of them.
Okay. I just want to point out the metrics tab here looks exactly the same as the one that I walked you through, but it's all empty. because that's where you fill in your data. So the instructions and examples is just to help you know what it will look like when it's all filled out and to help give you ideas. And then the metrics and the staff performance tabs are where you actually do the work. That is all the metrics. Any other questions about the metrics template before I just give you some final thoughts to leave on before we wrap up? The metrics template really is the biggest part of the continuous improvement plan. The CIP narrative requirements, as you saw, are very minimal. The metrics is where the vast majority of the work is. I'm not seeing any other questions. Morgan?
Nope.
So a question about the recording. So we will post the recording up on our website on that same page where I showed you the templates. We will put the recording and it will be in the right-hand toolbar. We'll have the recording as well as the PDF of the PowerPoint slides that we're using today. If someone wants the actual transcript from the captions, we will ask you to just send us an email to request that. It does not put those onto the actual recording, and then the captions file is just one big long transcript of everything that I have said today. So we're going to try and clean it up a little bit and provide it if anyone needs it, but we're not going to post it up on the website because we don't plan to correct all of the times that it hasn't quite gotten my words correct on the transcript. So it's not going to be the prettiest or most accurate of transcripts. All right, I'm going to jump back over finally to the to some just final tips. I have not seen both of these issues this year, but I do see one of them regularly. When you open the templates off of our website, please note that almost always they will open in read-only or protected view, and I get phone calls every year from people who can't figure out why they can't enter their data in. You just have to hit enable editing, and then it will let you move on your merry way. I have tried to change it, but it just doesn't want to behave. And then the other thing is, this is the one I have not seen yet this year, but I would be surprised if some of you don't run into it. And that's, we have had some issues in the past with track changes showing up, especially in Word. So more with the narrative than with the metrics. But if that happens, there's some really practical tips here on how to deal with that. So if you go to open it up and it's misbehaving and giving you track changes, come back to the webinar PDF of the slides and walk through these steps, and it will clear it up for you. We think we've avoided it for this year, but no promises. And then just a couple of notes on optional budgets. The literacy budget and advising budget are both optional. However, with literacy, it is probably in your best interests, especially since there's an expenditures report at the end of the year, to consider still building a literacy budget for internal use within your district, especially if you're in a larger district and you're splitting funds up between different schools, etc. So you're not required to use it. A couple of notes about it. The template does include, the template on our website does include an updated budget estimator to help you anticipate the amount of literacy funds that your LEA will receive for this year. So at the very least, that might be helpful for some of you. And then just to note that you will still be doing the expenditures report to the State Department of Education regarding literacy at the end of the 21-22 school year. And the advising budget, also totally optional, but the template is on our website in case you want to do that for managing your advising funds. And then this is just for those of you that do want to use our templates for budgets. I wanted to include this slide because there's some very practical tips about how to use the template without having it mess up the formulas. And so if you decide to use our template, you might jump onto the slides and use this page to know where to add rows and where not to add rows so that they end up in the formulas. And that's it, folks. So I am the contact for continuous improvement plans and also for the literacy program. And then while advising plans are optional, Byron Yankee is still available to answer any questions you have about advising funds or your advising program. So any other final questions before we close out for today?
There's one in here. In trying to get teacher groups of 5 or more, we may have to duplicate teachers in more than one group to get as many staff included. Is that okay, or can teachers only be represented once?
Wow, Patty, that's a great question. The language on it's really broad, so I don't think it prevents you from doing that. I would see that the challenge with that, from my perspective, would be that when you duplicate teachers like that and your groups aren't clean, that it muddies the water in terms of performance and in terms of what you're reflecting in the data. But there isn't anything in the statute that prevents you from doing that, because the language in the statute's really broad and we haven't further defined it in rule yet. So really great question. Any other questions? Morgan, did you get any more?
Nope, no more on this end.
Great. Okay. Thank you all. I will give you a little bit of time back. We planned this until 3:30 just in case there were lots of questions, and you all have been really excellent and asked some great questions. And if you do have a question that I have missed or that I wasn't great about answering and you need any clarification, please feel free to contact me by email or phone. If you start working on your plan and you realize you have a question that you didn't think of today, same thing. I'm here to try to help. So please feel welcome to reach out, and good to see you all. Have a wonderful summer. Thank you so much for the hard work you do. Thank you. And we'll see y'all later.